here are 10 bits of not-so-short advice for creating an adventure for the masses. I'll use my latest adventure as an example in this video so we can pick it apart and see how an adventure is built and how it changes through the creative process. You can pick this adventure and others up on lunchbreakheroes.com and, even better, over on our patreon.com page. This one is called A Clockwork Murder. In A Clockwork Murder, players are hired to investigate the death of one Lord Harrington. He's been drained of all his blood and it looks like a vampire attack. Clue upon clue leads players across a city near to panic about the return of a monster that they drove out 70 years ago. Will the players simply hunt the vampire and be done with it? Or will they uncover the true mystery behind Lord Harrington's death? That's A Clockwork Murder, and now that you know what it's about, let's get started with the advice. If you're going to make an adventure that's going to be played beyond your table, you cannot tailor it for the group that you play with. You can't include little references to their backstories or the specific abilities or items they have because none of that applies outside of your own group. Don't worry about who's going to play through the adventure because you can't control that. Instead, focus on creating an intriguing situation that anyone can enjoy, no matter what kind of character they're playing. But how do we start coming up with that intriguing situation? Easy. You start by planting a seed. Before an adventure can be published for the masses, it first has to start as an idea. All adventures start from some sort of mental seed, whether that's one idea or several, or a cool scene that you want to have played out, or a villain that you want to see in action. For me, at least, I like to start with specific themes that I want to explore. For A Clockwork Murder, I wanted to explore a love triangle and the idea that evil isn't always what we think it is. I knew right away that I wanted one character to be a vampire, somebody who's viewed as the primary antagonist but might not be the villain that everybody thinks he is. And to get the characters involved, there could be a murder that he's wrongly accused of. And right there, I had the seed of an adventure, a vampire wrongly accused of murder who was also involved in a love triangle. So with that seed planted, I had to brainstorm the rest of the adventure. The NPCs, the locations, the encounters, and all of that. Now, I could stand here and lie to you and say that I did the brainstorming all on my own, that I sat in dim lamplight, hunched over my desk, penning out various plots and locations by hand late into the night. But I'm not going to do that. I'll fully admit that my brainstorming buddy is none other than ChatGPT, and I cannot recommend it enough. Now, before you call me a hack, I didn't have ChatGPT write the adventure for me. I'm not that lazy, and honestly, ChatGPT is a really bad adventure writer. But it is fantastic at bouncing ideas back and forth with you and helping you to develop those ideas. The first thing I did was tell ChatGPT who I needed it to be and what I wanted it to do for me. I flat out told it, "You are a D&D adventure writer. Your job is to help me create an original adventure for D&D. We will start by bouncing ideas back and forth together. You can ask me questions and I can ask you questions. Then we can begin the process of laying out the structure of the adventure, the locations and characters, and the major plot points. Finally, we will flesh out the finer details of the adventure." And having no other choice but to be my obedient AI slave, ChatGPT was totally on board. I fed it all the details that I'd decided on up to that point. I told it I wanted a gothic setting, a vampire antagonist, a love triangle, all that jazz. From there, we discussed the locations in the adventure, notable NPCs, and how we could apply the 3-act structure to the adventure. Over the course of a couple of evenings, ChatGPT and I had come up with the broad strokes of the adventure. I took what we came up with, and I made a sketch of the adventure's locations and the plot points. It's nothing playable, but it was a start. So with this outline in hand, it was time to start writing. Now, if you've ever written anything, you probably know that the first draft of something is rarely the final draft. It's never any good, and I'd even go so far as to say that it's always pretty bad. An RPG adventure is no different. Just like with any other piece of writing, in order to get something on the page, don't be afraid to write complete crap for the first draft. I don't care if you're making Twilight fanfiction look like freaking James Joyce by comparison. Just get something on the page. You can't have a final draft if you don't start with a first draft. For example, my first draft of A Clockwork Murder was way too railroady. It started with the players at the murder scene, followed by them being escorted to the Chancellor's office by an inept guard named Rupert, who was assigned to investigate the murder. The end of Act 1 was accepting the Chancellor's bounty on the vampire. Then the adventure expected them to move from one location to another, and then to the end. This felt icky to me. What if the players wanted to jump right into the investigation and forego the bounty? What if they wanted to visit one location but not the other? What if they skipped one location entirely? If they did that stuff, then the rest of the adventure just wouldn't flow. But this was the first draft, which is supposed to suck, so I just made notes of the problems and continued on writing, because knowing what you want to change and what needs to change is what's going to kickstart your second draft. Your second draft is going to be better than your first. The second draft is where you start rearranging things so that they make better sense, and then you start cutting the crap. Things that aren't necessary or don't make sense for the adventure need to be cut out of it. For instance, I reversed the two scenes at the start of the adventure. Instead of starting at the murder scene and then getting the bounty on the vampire, which was railroady, they start at the Chancellor's office and get the bounty, and then they go investigate the murder scene. It felt better this way, and it made a lot more sense. With that change, however, I was also able to get rid of Rupert, the inept guard who was in charge of the investigation, because he just wasn't necessary anymore, so off he goes. I also removed a tavern that wasn't necessary, a friend of the murder victim, and some side quests that I had hoped would paint a better picture of the setting. All of that was done away with in the name of making the adventure better, to distill it down to its necessary elements and plot threads. You see, good editing is often about cutting away unnecessary content and getting to the heart of a piece of writing. It's like literary surgery. It may surprise you just how much ends up on the cutting room floor when making an adventure or some other piece of creative writing. During these initial stages, huge swaths of content are removed. Locations, NPCs, and entire plot points are dropped for one reason or another, all in the name of making a better adventure. Beyond the second draft is your third, fourth, or however many you need to get to a point where you're happy with the final product. And maybe you'll never be happy with it, which is where my next piece of advice comes in handy. To quote Douglas Adams, "I love deadlines. I love the whooshing noise they make as they go by." But deadlines are important, especially if you're working for yourself and you actually want to publish a product. It's important to have a finish line where you can say, even if I still think this adventure is crap, as long as it's playable, it's released by this date. I have a deadline every month. By the end of the month, I tell myself I will release an adventure. It's that self-imposed deadline that prevents me from continuously working on and trying to improve my adventures to a point where none of them will ever see the light of day. So set yourself a realistic deadline. For a one-shot, a month is pretty good for an experienced writer. If you've never done this before, then go ahead and make it 2 months to give yourself some breathing room. But make sure you have a finish line, or else you may find yourself chasing that finished product forever. In any good tabletop role-playing game, players have choices. Do you go right, or do you go left? Do you chase after the escaping criminal, or do you stay and look for clues? Do you refuse the onion dip that smells weird, or say, "What the hell, it's only food poisoning"? If you want to create an entertaining and engaging adventure, it needs to have choices, ways for players to exercise their agency that have a measurable impact on how things play out. I'm not saying that you need to have a branching decision tree where players are faced with 2 decisions, and then those 2 decisions have 2 more, and then all of those have 2 more, and on and on and on. That would be impossible to design for after just a few iterations. I'm saying that there needs to be 1 or 2 meaningful choices that players can make in the adventure. An optional location or NPC that offers some sort of benefit. An alternate route to the final destination that caters to one playstyle over another. 2 NPCs that players can help whose interests are in opposition to one another. In A Clockwork Murder, I went with an optional location and NPC. The party can go to an underground boxing ring and recruit the help of a guy named Erwin. Erwin knows how to get into the murdered nobleman's estate through a secret passage, so he makes one part of the adventure go really smoothly. The players can still tackle that part without Erwin, but it is more difficult. So that choice has a meaningful impact on how things play out. These sorts of choices and options make an adventure a lot more interesting. With them, an adventure goes from being an interactive novel, where the only direction is forward, to being a real role-playing game where the player choices really begin to matter. When I first set out conceiving A Clockwork Murder, I really wanted to use the 3-act structure. A lot of my adventures use this structure, and you'll notice that most of them contain 3 chapters, 1 chapter per act. Now, if you want to get a good up-close personal view of all of these adventures, go ahead and check out our Patreon page where you can download all of our adventures for as little as $1. It's a heck of a steal, and you get all of these adventures along with maps and module guides for Curse of Strahd and stuff like that, so absolutely go check it out at patreon.com/lunchbreakheroes. There's a link in the description down below. Now, if you aren't familiar with the 3-act structure, go ahead and check out this video right up here where I go over it and how it can apply to adventures. Now, as well as the 3-act structure has served me in the past, I found that it really wasn't working as well as I'd hoped with a mystery adventure. At the very least, it wasn't the only thing I needed to build A Clockwork Murder. Enter node-based design, stage left. This is also known as a point crawl. This is a design philosophy that's been around for a long time, but I first read about it from Justin Alexander in his blog, The Alexandrian. Justin's got a ton of advice around building adventures, and it is absolutely worth your time to delve into his stuff and just plow through it and just soak it all in. Structuring A Clockwork Murder with nodes look like this helped me really rethink how players would flow through the adventure's locations and how clues are spread around to help them A, solve the mystery of Lord Harrington's murder, and B, figure out where to go next. You can see in this graphic that we have a starting node up at the top, which leads to one of the nodes in the middle. That's the Chancellor saying, okay, go to the murder scene and investigate what this vampire did to Lord Harrington. Then from the murder scene, we connect out to other nodes by dropping clues to those locations. Those locations in turn have clues that lead to other locations. Eventually, the players amass enough clues to reach a conclusion of, hey, we should go to this place. There are a lot of ways to structure the nodes of an adventure, from linear to layer cake to funnels and more. The possibilities are pretty endless, but using nodes like this is an extremely effective way of laying out an adventure and the connections between locations and putting it in a way that players can navigate it fluidly and still feel like they have agency. And it also helps you plan things out and keep things straight in your head and get a really good overview of it and say, aha, I missed a piece here, and allowing you to fill it in. Because we can't plan for any particular player or character type when publishing an adventure, you never know who's going to be playing what you publish or what their favorite part of the game is. Do they love exploration and investigation? Are they totally into role-playing and social interaction? Or do they start salivating when somebody says the words, roll for initiative? A murder mystery like A Clockwork Murder is really heavy on the exploration pillar of gameplay. There's lots of looking for clues and going from one place to another. Talking to witnesses and whatnot touches on the social pillar of the game. And then we've got a few combat encounters to cover the combat pillar of the game. I try to include everything in this adventure. There's all kinds of players out there, and it's in our best interest to include all of them to some degree or another so that everybody has a great time. Ideally, those people will go to their other friends and recommend your adventure and my adventure because it had something in it that they loved. And that's what we want. Word of mouth is the best kind of marketing you can have. So try to appeal to the widest player base that you can by including all pillars of play in your adventure. I'll preface this bit by saying not every adventure requires combat. You can create and publish an amazing adventure that is built around solid social interactions or the exploration of a forgotten ruin where there isn't a single enemy NPC in sight. That being said, if you're going to include combat, it should be two things. 1, interesting, and 2, purposeful. Let's talk about those real quick. What makes combat interesting? First, let's describe a boring combat. Imagine being in a battle against 3 goblins in a small, completely empty, well-lit room. You're just standing there, whacking away at each other until one side dies. It's absolutely boring. Interesting combat involves variety. Variety in enemy types and tactics. Variety in environment and obstacles. A battle against those 3 goblins would be a lot more interesting if it were in a long, dark room with isolated pools of torchlight. One goblin's a melee fighter, the other is a spellcaster, and the third is shooting arrows from a hidden spot on a high ledge. In A Clockwork Murder, a big combat set piece is in the clockworks of a clock tower. There's rotating gears, walkways, superheated steam hazards, and whatnot. There's a lot of variety in this dynamic battlefield, and it's a lot of fun, and the enemy that they go up against has a lot of different abilities that makes combat challenging and fun at the same time. And then there's purpose. The combat in your adventure should be purposeful, not simply there as a random encounter or to slow players down or just because you like combat. No, combat should be there for a reason, like acting as a gate to the next area or helping to propel the party further along the narrative, or because it makes absolute narrative sense that the bad guy would send his henchmen to kill these people before they become a real threat to his plans. Every single combat encounter that you include in a small published adventure should have a reason for being there. If there is no reason, we go back to our cut the crap rule, and it's got to go. My final piece of advice is this. Get your adventure to a state that you're happy with by the deadline. Publish the damn thing and move on. Don't fall in love with this adventure. It's your baby while you're making it, but then it's time to put it out in the world and let it live its own life. Market it and hype it up for sure, but you have to put it out there and trust that the world will accept it, and it's either going to do great or it's not going to do so great. Either way is okay. The key here is to publish it and move on. Then start working on another adventure. Publish that one and move on, and then do it again and again and again, and eventually you're going to get really good at this publishing thing. You might even start making some money at it. And if you want to know more about making money in tabletop RPGs and some of the finer points of publishing, go ahead and check out this video right over here.